Welcome to another edition of Trail Runner Nation. My name is Don Freeman.
And I am Scott Warr. And as the title says, this is another edition of the Ask the Coaches. And we're thrilled to have on three coaches from Sharman Ultras. Of course, we have Ian Sharman, who's a regular guest. We have Matt Lay, who's been on here multiple times, and a new guest. Ian, introduce both of these great coaches to us for those who haven't heard them.
Happy to. So first of all, Dr. Matt Lay. He's been a coach for over a decade. He's an associate professor of physiology at the Idaho College of Osteopathic Medicine and a former chair of the Health and Human Performance Department at the College of Idaho. He's won the US ATF 100-mile trail championship at Rocky Raccoon 100-miler, annoyingly beating me into second place, but I can forgive him for that. And many other races, plus he's run a 2:23 marathon. Ooh. And he used to live down the road from me when I lived in the Bay Area, and he did too at that point. But he's been coaching for many, many years and has obviously got the sports science background too. And Jackson Brill, he's a new coach to my team, but he's been coaching since 2015, including with youth groups. He at CU Boulder. He studied under renowned biomechanicist Dr. Roger Cram, publishing research on uphill walk-run gait transition and research into super shoes. I know we'll be talking a little bit about that today. He's won big races like the Rut 50K, and he's represented Team USA at the Trail Running World Championships. I think that was in Austria. He chases FKTs in exotic parts of the US, and he currently lives down the road from me in Bend in Oregon.
Interesting.
Very nice.
Don, I am glad we're underqualified for this episode, aren't we? I'm glad that we don't have to come with topics or answers.
Scott, maybe explain to me one time that we were qualified for an episode. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
So the coaches have each brought a topic. Is that right? So we're just showing up, kind of hitting record and playing along with this distribution of wisdom. Is that correct? That was my preparation.
Hey, let's have Ryan do the roll the dice and see who goes first, and then you guys can pick one of the two topics that you brought to the table today.
That's you rolling dice, Ryan. You're on mute.
You're mute.
I just rolled the dice. We're gonna start with Jackson.
All right. Welcome, Jackson.
New guys first. Welcome,
good.
Jackson.
Appreciate it. Thank you for having me. So one of the topics I brought to the table was talking about easy ways to incorporate mental toughness into training. And, obviously ultras, we all know that a big part of it is how we kind of mentally handle adversity and whatnot. But it's pretty, I think a lot of people maybe struggle with how to incorporate that into training, and the idea of taking time out of our busy schedules to visualize or doing something miscellaneous kind of outside of the training process. I think a lot of us trail runners, ultra runners struggle with, because ultimately we kind of just like to do the stuff we like to do, which is running out of the trails, not with our eyes closed sitting on a sofa imagining mile 80 and the blood, sweat, and tears that are happening at that point. So I, for myself as well, for my athletes, like to encourage just little novel ways that we can focus on mental toughness while out on the run, because I think that the likelihood that athletes actually do that is a lot higher than asking people to do something outside of the training. So I have three main strategies that I recommend. The first is just backloading long runs by putting the harder stuff towards the end of it. So the best example of that would probably be if you map out a long run, maybe you map out a loop, doing it so that there's more vert in the second half than the first half. If there's a way to have a big, long, hard climb, either right at the beginning or right at the end of a run, generally choosing for that to be at the end of a run. So it's not one of those things that's going to really change the specificity of the work you're trying to get done on that day. But by putting the harder stuff towards the end when you're more fatigued, that's a way, I think, to incorporate, mentally, it's going to be harder to hit that, 4 hours into a run than 30 minutes into a run, for example. So, and, then that, when you get to mile 80, if I kind of keep with that analogy, right, you're you may be better prepared for whatever adversity, comes your way late in a race.
So procrastination is step number one, I'm hearing.
I'm solid. I got that down.
And the other thing before you get to number 2 and number 3, Jackson, is I love that you said simple ways to include mental toughness into your training. It kind of seems like oxymoronic statement there, to simply put something in your training that's going to actually make it really hard. So I'm curious about number 2 and
I
number
like
3.
the way you phrased it with procrastination as well. I hadn't thought about it that way, but I'm a big fan of procrastination, for better or for worse. So I'm gonna run with that from here on out. So the second way is the way I'll phrase it is include a pinprick of something difficult towards the very end of a run. So I think there's a few examples that I can kind of draw from my own training with that. Is the place I recently moved, but the place I used to live, I would, was in this, little neighborhood, and I would run 2 blocks past the block that, would be the quickest way back home. So basically, just rather than going straight home, I'd do a little switch back through the neighborhood, essentially, which would add a minute or two to the run. But when I ran from home, I got in the routine of always doing that at the end of those runs, because, when we're just on our little 30, 45, 60-minute run, that from home that, we probably all do a couple days a week, you generally towards the end of it just want to get home and get on with your day. So by adding just a tiny bit of something at the end, mentally, things come up that are unforeseen on, at any point in a race. So if you just get in the habit of doing this tiny bit extra that doesn't do anything physiologically, but mentally, right, when you first start doing that, it's maybe a little difficult because you're just used to, I'm just going to go right back home. So by adding just a little bit and kind of getting used to just doing something that's a little bit harder, right, on race day, there's going to come adversity that we didn't see coming. And if we're used to kind of adding a little bit of that in training ahead of time, right, we're going to be a little more prepared to handle that in race day. So I said this is just kind of doing the switch back through the neighborhood is the way I did it at the old place. Fortunately, the new place I live is like the world's steepest driveway. I think it gains probably 50 vertical feet in the 100 meters to get up to the house. So the new way I incorporate that is I just force myself to run, not walk. Now when I run from the house all the way to the doorstep, and it's not really an option. I got to get up the hill at that point, and towards the end of the run, I'm rarely looking forward to that now.
You reminded me of a couple things. Number one, probably 10 years, maybe over 10 years ago, when I was running with Don, we had run this pretty long loop, and it was a climb back up to the cars. And we got there, and I think I was leading. And so I started walking the hill up to the cars, and he goes, "Nope, this is what the 5 miles or the 8 miles or whatever the run was. That's what that was training us for, is this segment to the cars. We got to run this." And I just went, interesting.
Yeah,
And
don't waste that first 80% of the run. I mean,
yeah,
take advantage. You did all that work just for this moment to run that last bit. So don't waste all of that work.
So it was good because I wasn't prepared mentally to run that last leg. I knew that it was there and it was ahead of me, but I was planning on walking it, or power hiking, or whatever you call it as ultra runners, right? But we had to run it, and it was hard. It was really hard. And I love the idea, and I'm going to try to implement this into my normal training plan. Is, Don and I have this loop that we always do. It's just the loop that we run. It's the same loop. There's hardly any variation to it, but to include, without the other person's knowledge, at the end of the run, an extra bit, and it could be even another mile or two. I remember a run that we did one time, or maybe I wasn't even on this run, Don, you can correct me, where the training run, the night training run, was supposed to be like a 12-mile training run, and 12 miles or 11 miles into it, the person that had planned the run says, "We only have 5 more miles." And Don said, "What? we should only have one more mile. That's all I had prepared for is 12 miles. And now you're going to make me go another 4 miles in addition to that. And so I think that that's also good to know, because when we're in races, your GPS watch may be off and you may be thinking, I only have 10 miles to go. And at the last aid station, they say, no, the next aid station, the finish line's 12 miles away. That could kill your mental motivation. So brilliant. I love that, Jackson.
I like your what you did better even than what I did, because after a certain point, I know what's upcoming and it kind of just becomes automatic. So when you have someone else helping call the shots, right, that's way more mentally difficult than just you getting in a routine of, doing that pinprick of difficulty that you just get used to. And, certainly you wouldn't want to add 4 miles to every training run, but I think mentally, right, there's definitely a time and a place to keeping yourself guessing or having someone else kind of throw you a curveball. So I really like that, even better than my number 2. So I just need to run with people more, because I don't put myself in that position enough. Ian, maybe we'll go out on some runs and you can add a couple miles when I'm not expecting it.
I'll add in some extra
Sounds
stuff
good.
for you. Yeah.
His added addition is going to be, you're going to go out for a 2-hour training run, and he's going to say, oh, by the way, you have to wear this weight vest.
I'd like to point out I never ever run with the weight vest. I only hike with it, and it's only like 10 or 20 miles a year.
Hey, we had to include it somewhere in the podcast, Ian. You knew we did.
Yeah, that's fair.
Sharman.
All right, number
so
3. And then I have a question about mental toughness to put to the table. So go with number 3, Jackson.
Sounds
I'm
good.
ready.
So number 3 is, and I will add the caveat of safety notwithstanding, but don't change your running plans due to the weather. So if it's going to rain for a couple hours during the time you planned on running, don't punt that run to later in the day when the sun's out. Certainly that would probably make the run more enjoyable for most of us. But, if you, unless it's a safety issue, right? If you're going out into the big mountains and, you're going to die in the snow or whatnot, that is not what I'm advising. But put yourself in the elements, because weather is a big part of races, particularly longer races where the weather may vary from what you expect, or what the race weather is right at the beginning of the race. So if you put yourself in the elements and don't let yourself out or let yourself off easy, if you have the flexibility to run in better weather, just force yourself to be out in the elements, and mentally it's not going to be as fun, but you are going to be mentally a little tougher for that.
I like it. I wrote down run anyway for point number 3. I like it. So my question to the table, to the 3 coaches here, Ian, Jackson, and Matt, is do you consciously shift into mental toughness? Is it something you say to yourself, okay, I'm gonna work on mental toughness. I'm gonna exercise my determination and get through this. Can you shift your mindset into a mental toughness mindset?
I think one of the main ways I have my athletes do that is when they develop a race plan is they come up with mantras, right, that are for that race plan. And it's often those mantras will differ depending on what part of the course they're in. And so they're geared specifically for, mental toughness in this part of the course, or maybe it's relaxation at the beginning part of the course. And so you really have to tailor that. And they do commit to training the mental toughness and sort of coming up with that ahead of time. The second thing I have them do for races specifically is, a pre-mortem, which is very common. And, when you sort of do these life planning things, it's what are all the things that can go wrong, and think through all of the things that can go wrong ahead of time, so that when you get to that thing that has gone wrong, that blister that's shown up, that GI issue that you have, those cramps that you're developing, you have a plan in place and you don't waste that mental energy. You have that mental toughness already developed in case of that thing happening. So those are just a couple race specific things I like to do. I have similar things to Jackson that I like to implement in the training portion that really tries to mess with people's focus. But we can go to those if you want to hear them.
I do want to hear them. I want to comment on what you said. You bring in a mantra or energy for mental focus. So if it takes energy to use mental focus, as a racer runner, do you recognize when it's going good, going easy, when you're just cruising along? Do you recognize that as, hey, this is a spot that's going so well, everything's working just right, temperature's right, pace is right, time of the day is right, nutrition's right, and then let yourself relax and enjoy some easy miles in preparation maybe for something ahead that's tougher. So really recognizing when, hey, I can kind of cruise through this. This is nice.
Yeah, so it's whether you develop a sort of a dissociative pattern of mental thinking, so you dissociate from how you're feeling, and sometimes that's the best approach. Like I will typically recommend that earlier on, right, when you tend to be a little bit fresher and you don't maybe want to dig in mentally to the tough things that are upcoming, and then have more of that mental focus, checking in and seeing how your body actually feels later in the race. So having that shift at some point, and likely that shift, will be dictated by the type of course, right? Maybe it's right before a large climb, or it's right after the 60-mile mark, or something like that sort of dictates the best place for that shift to occur.
Nice. Ian.
Well, I think the question you just asked a minute ago was, is this something you just turn on and off? I'd argue it's something that is a mentality that you want to be thinking about the whole time. Like you think of yourself as an athlete the whole time. That doesn't mean you're training the whole time, but all the decisions you're making are through that lens. So in terms of the mental side of it, you're trying to get habits. I know a couple of years ago, you guys were reviewing the book Atomic Habits, and how do you set things up? So you want to set things up for success where you have the runs, you've got your gear ready and you're used to just going out. And even if the weather's bad, you're still going to go out. And that way you keep the consistency and you're going to keep doing things. There is a fine line there, I think, between always doing the hardest thing and also being able to recover, and knowing how to do that in training is especially important, particularly because in ultra running, we're taught that you're meant to be tough. But toughness is something where you've got to work out what is the appropriate thing to do still. Again, it's the overarching mentality of what you're doing. It doesn't mean if you've got a broken leg, you still get out and get your run for the day, no matter what. It means you've got to make those adjustments. And is it being tough as in it's mentally difficult and it's challenging and it's helping you to get fitter? Or is it tough because you're being too stubborn and you just want to hit your mileage for the week, even though that's actually not going to make you fitter? So the more you can think about it in terms of the habits of, well, it doesn't matter what the weather is in winter, I'm still going to get out, the better things are likely to go. But one little tip that I add to that is when I first got into running, I was running around the football pitch at university, and you could see where people did their runs, and it's just a little bit worn away around it's not on the actual soccer pitch, it's on the edge of it. You can see where they run and they cut the corner. And so I always thought, even at that point, I will go right into the corner. I'm adding 3 feet. It's nothing. But by choosing the harder option, like Jackson was talking about, doing that extra little bit of hardness at the end of his run, you normalize that if things are happening and it's difficult, it's okay if the harder thing happens. Like you feel worse than you expect, or you think it's 5 miles to the finish line and it's 6 miles. If you're always kind of thinking of that little extra thing, there's a couple of options and you're picking the slightly harder one, then it mentally prepares you better for dealing with that adversity when it is something worse than what you expect in a race.
Good comment.
I love that you've made that comment. A lot of times we do talk about this mental toughness, and that's like you say, I've have a compound fracture in my tibia, but I'm so tough that I'm going to continue. And there are some very famous runners out there that do Instagram that claim they're super tough, right?
David Goggins' book is right behind me. Yeah.
I didn't want to say it, Ian. I didn't want to say it, but we're reading a book right now, and Don can remember the title. I could look it up too. But one of the things the guy said in the very first chapter was, it's not about being tough. It's about how to perform at your peak, regardless of the situation. So taking the situation and being able to work through it. And I think, Jackson, brilliant 3 ways to include that frame of mind into your training to say, okay, here's the situation. I'm going to still perform at my peak regardless of what that situation is.
Yeah, I believe
Jackson.
there's some even research on, I can't recall whether it's ultra endurance specific or just, exercise specific, but a lot of reasons why people quit or don't achieve their goal in a sporting context is when their expectations and the reality when there's a difference between the two. So if mentally you're in a position where you're not surprised or nothing, jumps on your back or whatnot, that's going to lead to success as opposed to like just what the objective difficulty is. It's more about, are you used to that or not? So mentally a strategy, and it's not even intentional, but I find myself as an athlete doing in a lot of long runs or races is I just tell myself it's going to be harder than I think it's going to be. I tell myself this last climb, it might really suck. The last 20% of a race is going to be really, really hard. And if I've set that expectation, it's usually not quite as hard as I've built it up in my mind to me. So I wouldn't call it pessimistic thinking, but I cautionary thinking. I like that. Yeah, where I tell myself something's going to be really, really difficult, and then when it's one less really difficult than I kind of mentally built it up in my mind, I'm pleasantly surprised that it was more manageable than I built something up to be.
That's fantastic. I have a question. Matt, you had a couple more comments to add on to Jackson's list. You said you had a couple. Interested in hearing them. Scott, the name of the book is written by Mark Devine, Unbeatable Mind, Forge Resiliency and Mental Toughness to Succeed at an Elite Level. So very, very good book.
A future podcast episode coming out, so you can get that book and do some homework if you haven't read it already. I think Ian had a quick comment, and then we'll get to Matt.
Well, it's just related to the fact that being mentally tough doesn't mean being rigid. It's about being flexible. So in a race, things will go differently to what you expect. If you stick to plan A, that isn't being tough. Like, you're going too fast, you're huffing and puffing. Clearly the pace is unsustainable. That isn't a tough person. That is someone who's going to make more mistakes and have worse races. So you've got to be able to adjust as the facts change as well. But the toughness to accept that is where the mental toughness comes in. It's not the toughness to ignore it. It's the willingness to say, oh, actually, I'm going through a bad patch. I've got to do something about it, even though I don't want to be going through a bad patch. But if you ignore it, it's always going to get to a worse situation, and then you'll be forced to deal with it anyway, but it'll slow you down more.
Great comment. Good point. Matt, you were going to add to the discussion.
Well, first, I lived in Denmark for a little while, the happiest people on earth, apparently. And one of the things that they say, the reason why they are so happy is because, they've lowered expectations so low. The gap between expectations and reality is very little. So it's sort of like being mentally tough in a way. There's a parallel there, which is interesting.
I love it.
But
the pessimist is never disappointed, as they say.
Yeah. And so some of the workouts that I do, I often have intervals that have different paces within the interval. So maybe it's a 2-mile interval where the first and the fifth 400 meters is faster. And so I love these like pace switching things because I think it builds mental toughness and focus. So you have to shift, you have to get a feeling for like how does that faster pace feel? How does it feel to adjust to a slightly slower pace, et cetera? So that's one workout. And then another one I like to do is super short recoveries. So this is sort of based on my high school coach used to, when he was training, he would have his coach would have him, get at the line, 800 meters. And then the coach would be like, back in the line. And they'd have no idea what the workout was. And it was just rep after rep after rep of not knowing what it was. I can't do that because I'm not standing next to my athletes, but I often like to have these super short recoveries. So it'll be like 45 seconds hard, 15 seconds like float, 30 seconds hard. And again, it's that shifting of pace and that having to re-engage mentally that is sort of a way to refocus. And that so often happens in ultras where you can just get lulled into this like slower effort and you just kind of are not really paying attention to how you're feeling. And so I really want to train that muscle for the athletes.
And it's okay to fail sometimes in training. That's how you know where your limits are. And so that kind of workout is then pushing someone maybe to do more than they realized they could. Maybe they were being too conservative. So it allows them to give themselves a bit more slack and to dig in a bit deeper. But if it does go wrong, that's really valuable for next time. You've got a better sense of what warning signals you have to be careful about. So that's both physical and mental, because you can't really separate the two when you're training hard and trying to work out what's going to work best for you.
Matt, you talked about your high school coach that you didn't know really what was going to happen, and you made me think, I went through Marine Corps boot camp, and for 3 months, I had no idea what was going to happen. I just knew in 3 months I would graduate if I did everything they asked. And so I lived on the edge of not knowing. So that was, I related to that.
That's a
comment.
really good point, Don. I mean, that's what they're trying to train is mental toughness, right?
Yeah. You're up, Scott. You had something to say?
Resilience as well. It's the resilience to be able to deal with adversity. Because if you're in a military situation, you can't just go, oh, well, I'll DNF today. You can do that in a race.
Right.
But you've got to deal with it there. And that's the kind of thing that can help. Again, as long as it's not too much. If they're just beasting you all the time, it might just break you down mentally. So it's trying to get the right balance, like with training in general, of what allows you to get better and pushes you to the edge of what you can do and maybe a bit beyond versus what just destroys you and leaves you demoralized.
Good.
Dang, Jackson, you came out strong. The rookie came out strong and took up almost half the podcast time. Well done. As you can see, this is one of our favorite topics, this mental aspect of what we do. Whether it bring it back to, real life too, being an ultra runner or getting through the problems and adversities in life, you need to have that same mindset, I think, to be successful.
So my final question to you, Jackson, was number 2, the pinprick at the end of a run or wherever you put it. You said you included a pinprick for mental toughness. How often do you exercise that? Is it once a week, every run? Give us some perspective on how often we do the pinprick.
I would say I do the pinprick as often as I can without, working too hard at it, at least in terms of, like contriving something that might take a ton of energy to contrive. So when I run from my house, right, I try to include that pinprick every time I run from the house. So, and that'll vary, throughout the year, how often I am running from the doorstep. And if I'm going to a trailhead, maybe if it's a trailhead I'm super familiar with, I can, have some sort of habit of pinprick at that place. But, if I'm running somewhere novel, I'm not going to, go way out of my way to figure something out. But I think that's the great thing about it being a pinprick is there's not this physiological or time cost to doing it as often as you want to, right? If, the example that you brought up about adding 4 miles, when you two go running, right? That's physiologically going to come at a cost. So you would have to use that, or it'd be a good idea to do that, somewhat sparingly. But the nice thing about the pinprick, right? If it's adding 1 minute, for example, if we're talking about a duration addition, right, that's physiologically not doing anything for better or for worse. So you can really do the pinprick as frequently as you want to, in my view.
And I like to think of it more like a habit, and you use that word, Jackson, which is you're always trying to do something that is a little bit harder, but within the realm of what you're aiming for that day. So even on an easy run, I always get my runners to try to avoid slowing down at the end. So let's say they're going at a very comfortable pace for 6 miles. I'll say, well, make the 6 mile just a tiny bit faster. Maybe it's just 5 or 10 seconds a mile quicker. So it's not physiologically demanding, but it's getting them used to the idea of pacing for one thing, but also the mental toughness of it's a bit more challenging at the end. And it's harder to do that with speed sessions and long runs, but it's more important there as well because they're more tired. But trying to make sure that people are day in, day out, finishing their runs well. And if they blow up or if they slow down, okay, well, next time you've got to improve that. But you want to be doing it all the time because you can't expect to get that pacing right and the mentality of dealing with it being tough at the end right if you only do it on race day. It is a habit that you're reinforcing or doing the opposite if you aren't doing it all the time and you're making it worse for race day. So I always like to remind people at every run, you've got an element of that, whether it's a pinprick or just just not fading basically as well.
Mm-hmm. And I can imagine a pinprick can come in any shape. It could be a hill repeat, it could be pace, it could be distance. I mean, your pinprick could vary a great deal. It always doesn't have to be the same. Is that term pinprick new? Jackson, did you think of pinprick or have I missed it a million posts?
It was from the quilting podcast.
Oh, that's right.
I feel like pinprick's just a term we might use in general vernacular.
We are.
You could even, if you're really struggling
we're using
with a metaphorical pinprick, you could even literally give yourself a little pinprick. Maybe when you're running from that new trailhead where you don't know how to incorporate something mentally difficult, you'll just give yourself a little prick with the sewing needle.
Speaking of that, I know we're on mental toughness. I should leave it alone. But there was a study at Western States that squeezed somebody's finger with a certain amount of pressure at one point, and the runner would rate what that pressure felt like on a scale of 0 to 10. And then they gave the same exact force at the end of the race and asked them what was their perception of pain. And it was much lower. We get a little bit tougher and resilient as we move through. And I think that's an interesting study that they did.
Good deal.
I can't think of anything more to talk about on mental toughness and try to get all these topics in, Scott, but this is our favorite, no doubt.
Ryan, who's our next
All right, we're going to go to
from?
Dr. Matt.
Nice.
All right. Well, I'm going to caveat this with saying your answer cannot be mental toughness. So single thing that most ultra runners don't do enough of in training. And I asked this question because I wanted to hear from Jackson and Ian, not because I wanted to tell you what it was. So,
oh, good.
So maybe I'm going to play host here and say, Ian, what do you got?
I would say if it were to be one thing and a universal answer, it would be working on the things that they're not as good at. Because you tend to avoid the things that you're slower at or feel tougher. So I'm not as good at uphill running, which is one of the reasons I power hike more. It's also one of the reasons I do more downhill and more flat running. So I know that I have to focus on that. And so each runner will have the certain things they enjoy more, which is going to usually correlate with what they're better at, and the things they don't like as much. Even, some of the discussions we've had in recent years about road running versus trail running, do something that you don't do as much so that you can get better at it, and you've probably got more to gain from that. So that there's a universal answer, I think, that anyone could apply in any situation.
Good answer.
Ian wouldn't take my answer, so I didn't have to scramble for something. Unfortunately, he did not. I'm going to say eating and fueling. I think it's one of those things that, at least in an ultra context, is the most important thing that makes or breaks people's races, and it's something we all should probably be doing a little more of in training.
I have to say, Ian, when I originally thought of this question, I hadn't thought of that answer, but then I thought of it almost immediately after I sent you that question. And I think that the novelty is the thing that people should be doing, right? It's whatever you're not doing. It's the novel thing is what you should be doing, because that is the thing that will be stressful, and that is the thing that you will adapt to when we think about physiology. And so whether it's the person who doesn't get in the weight room, or the person who doesn't eat on their long runs, or the person who doesn't have access to uphill terrain, it's the novel thing is probably the thing that specific person should be doing. But originally what I was thinking of was strength training, because I don't think ultra runners do enough strength training. And I feel like it's something that it's relatively low hanging fruit that would be much better use of time than, say, an hour easy, if you were able to replace that with some strength training.
What do you think, though, Matt, when you've got someone who's really time pressed, they're struggling to get the bare minimum amount of running in because they've got kids and long hours and stressful work. So, they're training for 100-miler and they can get in 3 hours of running a week. Even at the minimum thresholds, would you still say, okay, carve out some for strength training there? Or at that level where they really don't have any time and they're scraping by with the running, how would you prioritize it there?
I'd probably still try to replace a 30-minute run during the week with a strength training session. And it might be a more circuit-based type of approach that actually has a cardiovascular component as well, right? Rather than, say, a more traditional strength training program where you're, squatting under a bar or doing deadlifts or something like that, which I do think runners can really benefit from. And I've seen firsthand some of the athletes I've worked with, I think they are extremely resilient when we talk about that resiliency component for training because of the strength training that they do.
As I was thinking this, I had things pop into my head as soon as you asked the question, Matt. And then I thought it kind of all depended on timing of my running career. At the very beginning, I didn't know how to hike. I did not know how to power hike. And that was a bad thing. I should have done more hiking for a couple reasons. To know what it feels like to power hike for an hour or two. And number two was to find out how fast can I power hike, so that I know, if I'm pushing cutoffs can I make it to the next aid station by power hiking and slowing down so that my stomach gets better? And so I think, so that was an early thing. And recently, a couple things that, over the last probably 5 years, speed work is something that I've heard on this podcast from multiple guests. You need to do some speed work. And I never did it because, as Ian, you put it, it's not something I liked or had fun at. But I found as I implemented that, I got better. And the other one, probably since COVID, is strength training, getting into the gym. That's something I kind of put off the radar. I know, Don was a big gym rat for a long time. And early in my high school and college career, I was a gym rat. And so I loved the gym, but I just thought ultra runners don't need to be in the gym. But since I've been doing that the last probably 3 or 4 years, it's really improved my running. So for me, what is the thing that I've left out? It depended on what timing in my life or where I was in my running career.
And bear in mind that when you're doing stuff that you're not as good at, that is mental toughness training. It's because you're forcing yourself to do something you probably don't want to do as much. Do you not agree, Matt? Or
No, he said you couldn't bring up mental toughness.
It wasn't my main answer. It's my add-on answer. No, but that is, doing the things you don't like as much and forcing yourself out the door. It's like when it's horrible weather and you force yourself out the door. That is making you mentally tougher because you're used to having things that are less pleasant or not the thing you choose to do happening, which is inevitable in races.
Yeah.
Now, I really like the strength training, thinking about it in the way for an ultra runner that, I don't need to be super strong. Well, yes, you do. You're really creating a heavy duty suspension for what you're doing, thickening ligaments and tendons and joint cartilage and all of these things because of the heavy lifting that allow you to run those long endurance miles because your suspension and your frame is very strong. And so I think very important to get under those weights and push those so you can go out and do the repetitive training that we do. I think it's an important one, the weight training.
Yeah, good topic, Matt. I guess that puts us with Ian, right, Ryan?
Simple math.
Let him roll the dice. It might not be me. Okay, well, I did have one that was actually a big overlap in terms of the mental side of things, so I'll stay away from that one. But the other one was, what is the hardest race distance to run really well? Not to finish, but to the run to the best of your ability. And I'll start off with some thoughts on that. But I would say, again, it's probably the ones that you don't do as much. So it varies from person. So a lot of ultra runners hate 5Ks. I think 5K is one of the hardest distances for me personally.
I would agree.
Because it's out of my comfort zone. To finish 5K, of course, if you can run 100 miles, you can jog 3 miles. But can you run it well? And so I think it's, again, there's benefits to doing the things you're not as good at. But I would say that other than the things that you don't train for as much, to some degree, the longer the race is, the harder it is to get everything to come together. You can't just get through it purely on fitness. You need a lot more things to work. Like a 200 miler, you see the best 200 miles in the world aren't necessarily the best 100 milers in the world, partly because it's maybe slightly different people doing them, but also because it's a different skill set. There's a whole load of different things you got to learn, like sleeping and eating for 3 days nonstop. So I would say the longer it is, the harder it is, and the further away from your normal, the harder it is as well.
Good one. Marathons scare the pee out of me. Well, marathon distance, I've never run a marathon, and it frightens me. And I doubt I'll ever run a marathon.
Well, that's the reason you should.
I need to do a masogi, right, Don? What is that?
Right.
What is called a masogi?
It's something.
It's something.
And Ian, I was thinking, because I saw the question come across that there's going to be a question for the show. Not that we do that much prep, but I did see it. And first thing that came to my mind was, a 5K, because there's not a lot of room for error. It's 100%. You go, if you want to hit your potential, you've got to be running on that knife's edge all the way through to hit that. And that knife's edge is very thin, and it's easy to fall off that thing. And if it's a longer race, you have time to make a mistake, time to recover, time to adjust, time to read, time to do all of the things during a long run that a short run doesn't give you that opportunity to make that adjustment.
Well, one of the things there is you need a longer warm up for a shorter race. If you're doing a 100 miler, you can warm up in the first 10, 20 miles to some degree. If you're doing a 5K or a 1 mile race or something like that, you've got to be on it in the first seconds. So you've got to probably have more miles beforehand. You've got to have more dynamic stuff. But I think people often think, well, the longer the race is, maybe the longer the warm up. But you don't need to do a 5-mile jog before your 100-miler. That's certainly something I wouldn't advise.
Good point. Matt or Jackson, any comments on the length of the race?
I'll say
Jackson.
a road marathon is the hardest race distance to execute. And I'll first answer globally, kind of for all runners, not just trail or ultra runners. And I think the reason why is because it's how we set goals and kind of our expectations for that race. So for most of us doing trail races, right, we know and expect things will go wrong. We're not super attached to a time, particularly in trail races or courses we don't know as well, right, because there's just so much unpredictability. But most people running road marathons, you set a time goal that's very precise, very specific, and also really ambitious. If I think my ceiling in a road marathon is 2 hours and 25 minutes, when I eventually get around to running a road marathon, I'm going to shoot for 225 when it would probably be smarter to shoot for just under 230. So I think, we marathoners and road marathoners, just set really high expectations, and it's a long enough race that, it's just hard to execute, particularly when you are operating on this razor thin margin of expectation and potential. And then if I answer it a little more precisely to our audience of trail and ultra runners, we spend most of our time, over a multi-year period, generally training for not road marathon training. So, if we try to turn around and run a road marathon on an 8 to 12 week buildup, and that's not something we've done in months or years, it also just leaves not a ton of room for error. And it's not something that we have a ton of, experience doing if we're just trying to squeeze a road marathon kind of in between our trail seasons or whatnot. So I think road marathon is really difficult to execute, whether you're purely a road marathoner, but then particularly within our cohort of trail and ultra running.
Jackson, do you think part of that is because it's too easy to get focused on the outcome versus the process when it's time-based and you've done it before and it's comparable to another race? Do you think that's a big component of making a marathon
Definitely.
harder?
Yeah, I tried to say it, but you said it more eloquently than I did. So absolutely.
I want to ask a quick question for the coaches. Hypothetical. Let's take Eliud Kipchoge and Usain Bolt, and we're going to have them run the other athlete's race. They have 3 months to prepare. So we're taking Eliud Kipchoge, and he's going to run the 100-meter a race, and Usain Bolt, we're going to have him run a marathon. Who would be more successful?
I think we can all do a one-word answer there, and I'm pretty sure it'll be the same answer. Is that a quick way of doing it? And then we can explain a bit more. But Kipchoge would be way more successful.
I think so. That's who I would say. Absolutely. Yeah.
In fact, they just had some of the 400-meter, 200-meter kind of runners from the Olympics. I think it was Gabby Thomas and a couple of other runners, and they tried to run a mile as hard as they could. So these are the best in the world. Gabby Thomas won the 200 meters. And I think the quickest any of them did was about 6 minutes, and one of them was like 7.5. And they zoomed off and they blew up, and they were collapsed on the track afterwards. And so that's just going from the top end of sprints to the bottom end of distance. And they were horribly bad at it, no matter the fact that they are world champions. So it's much harder to go from the sprints to the long distance, because the top distance runners, they're still going to run 11, 12 second 100 meters. They're still going to be quick. But someone like Kipchoge in a marathon, I don't think he'd finish, to be honest. I think, not Kipchoge, sorry, Usain Bolt in the marathon, I don't think he'd finish it. And if he did, he would be walking it in.
Yeah.
He'd start too fast.
He'd be in the lead at the beginning.
Matt, did you have a comment to wrap it up?
Well, I think the marathon is a difficult distance in part because the energetics involved too. Like we only have, a certain amount of glycogen levels, and the marathon is cruel in that it's, 10K beyond that level. And so the wall is like a thing in the marathon. So I think the races where you sort of have to switch energetics are the ones that are hardest. So personally, I would say the hardest race is indoor 800 meters, because you get this terrible, terrible cough afterwards. And it's just like you're sprinting from the gun. but you have to run 2 laps. Like I'm running close to my 100-meter all-out pace, but I have to do it for 800 meters, 8 times as far. And so as a true distance runner, that was terrible in college to have to run that sort of distance.
I thought someone would say 800 meters. I don't think I've ever run an 800 meters, but I have heard it is the hardest race to do well. But so I had another thought, but I've lost it now. It'll come back in a second, but continue without me while I get through my own mind.
Let us know when it comes back to you. I think we need to roll.
Yeah,
we need to roll the dice, right?
Oh no, the thought is drifting back. Let's not let him lose it. Go, Ian.
Well, so yeah, I think there's a reason why the marathon is kind of the road distance and the 100 miles is kind of the trail distance, because they're the ones where they're really testing a lot of boundaries. So it's once you get to the marathon that you can bonk. That doesn't really happen in the half marathon and below. And in distance running beyond that, it's the 100 miler has so many things that go wrong compared to even the 100K or the 50 mile of your stomach being a lot more difficult, night and day running, all these extra challenges. So I think there is an element why there is kind of the marathon road and the 100-mile trail that are in some ways the pinnacle of each of those sports.
Yeah, and it's affirming to hear you say that, because after the question was asked, I was debating between answering a road marathon or trail 100 miler. So great minds think alike.
And I like, Matt, what you said about the energetic shift. You know, the person that's running the 100-meter never explores or needs that, extra calories, never grabs a goo halfway down the course to fuel themselves to complete. So that's training the body to do something it's never done or had to even confront. All right, Ryan, are you rolling new dice, or are we just rotate in the same order? What's the call, Ryan?
Do you have one, Jackson? We can roll back.
Sure. Yeah. So my second topic was talking about super shoes on the trails. So it's well established at this point how much and how powerful these road super shoes with the new foam and generally carbon fiber plates are in the road world. And we've just seen records get shattered on the road and even the track. With the influx of the new foam that the Nike 4% kind of first popularized, and we're starting to see that those same technologies, both the newer kind of higher tech foams as well as carbon fiber curved plates in trail shoes, and you're I think seeing more athletes adopt them, but you're not seeing this as big of a revolution as the road world, where now anyone is wearing shoes that just came out in the last several years, and I think some of that is because the demands and what we need and look for in a shoe on the trails are different than on the road. So the foam, and the Nike blend was called PIBA, which stands for polyethyl something or other, and it's generally a softer foam that, if you're running on steeper or technical trails, might make you a little bit more unstable. And you're generally seeing. I know one of the first trail super shoes, and I use that term loosely, was the I don't remember the specific model, but it was the Saucony Power Run. Do you guys know if I have that name right? It's something like that, but it had the PIBA foam that the Nike 4% kind of first came out with, and you saw a lot of initial feedback talking about how unstable that shoe was on technical terrain, and risk and worry about rolling ankles in that shoe, and some of that is because of that softer foam. Another thing too with these shoes that have plates in them is it makes it kind of similar to the foam. You have a little bit less proprioception on technical terrain and on steeper terrain, and on the roads that doesn't matter, right? You can just throw your foot out there and it can land however needed. There's not a ton of variability from step to step or stride for stride versus especially on steeper, more technical terrain. you do kind of need that ability to, quickly lift your feet and, change your cadence or whatnot. So, there's certainly times and places to utilize these newer shoe technologies, but we still need to think about shoes the same way we've always thought about them on the trails. In that, some shoes are just going to work better for you than others, just based off of individual preference. And then also just talking event demands, right? There's going to be times where you need a shoe that's a little more rugged and less performancy, using that term in kind of a road context. So, I personally really like the Nike Zagama, which has that, PIBA based foam. And there's a lot of times that I take that out. But if I'm going to go do some gnarly steep FKT where my average pace is 20 to 30 minutes per mile, I'm just going to reach for my trusty Sportiva that I would hate running on the roads on, but I need when I'm on high consequence and really dynamic terrain. So let's take advantage of these new shoes, but also not forget about the way we've always thought about shoes and how we make decisions regarding what footwear to use.
As trail runners, isn't this one of the topics that we could spend hours on the trail as we're running down the trail talking about his shoes? As you were talking, Jackson, I thought back, when I started running, Montrail was a big shoe, and all the big best trail shoes all had rock plates in them. And you don't hear about that anymore. I don't know if they still have them or not, but you don't hear about that. That was a feature that they were touting, and using in their marketing. Oh, this has a rock plate in it. And now they don't have rock plates, I don't think, but they have these carbon fiber plates. And I'm just wondering, is it really something that makes a difference for us on the trails? And I know there's been scientific studies that say that you can on the road or whatever, these shoes do make a difference and make people faster. But I think it's just interesting that we kind of evolve as the technology evolves. Ian?
It seems like there's a similarity between shorter distance races, particularly on the road, where fitness is going to be the main component, and then trail running, where you've also got to have the right gear and you've got to practice for dealing with temperature and problem solving and eating and all these other factors. And it's kind of the same with the trail shoes. They've got to be able to do more rather than just give you a bit more bounce. So the one thing that I think it potentially could help with, and I'd be really interested to know if there's any research into this yet, is does it cause less muscle damage for later? Because I think that with the road shoes, the main thing people discuss is it makes you go faster. But also you hear about the pro runners who are able to do more mileage, who are feeling better at mile 26 in a marathon. So potentially if it's saving your muscles a little bit, that could have an even bigger effect in a trail ultra. Of course, it's not going to matter as much if you're death marching at the end. It doesn't matter how bouncy the shoes are. But maybe it means that you're death marching at mile 95 instead of mile 85. And that is worthwhile, even if it's not made you go faster along the way to that point. So, Jackson, do you know if has there been any research, even on the road shoes, for how much it saves your legs for later?
So I was going to jump in and say some similar, which is, when I worked in the research lab at CU during my undergrad and master's, I wasn't personally, working on the research that our lab was doing on the Vaporflies and Next% shoes, but I did get to see firsthand the scientists that were coming out with that initial research. And fortunately, I'm still in contact with my advisor and the postdoc from the lab, Dr. Crom and Dr. Hukamer, who are kind of the names in shoe research. And it's funny because you see so many people touting theories as to how or why these shoes may work the way they are, but I've never heard, Dr. Crom or Dr. Hukamer say, oh, the plate is definitively doing this. We can measure, and it's been well demonstrated that they do change biomechanics slightly, that the foam, in these road shoes does improve running economy. But, the greatest minds and the people who know the stuff the best, maybe similar to, this is maybe just how scientists in general do things, but, they're not willing to definitively say how or why these shoes are working, even in a road context. We can measure that we've seen these running economy improvements, but I'm going to stay loyal to my, scientific, influences and say we really don't know a lot at this point, and it's great to have theories. And but yeah, I think there's still just a lot we don't know. And when we're on any topic
Interesting.
with that kind of in a coaching or athletic context, the default answer is trust your instincts and trust your personal feedback and do what works best. So that was kind of what I was trying to say with the shoes is right. Find your individual preference, find what shoes work well on what terrain. And we don't know much definitively yet, even in a road context, mechanistically how these shoes are working. And that's even magnified in a trail context. So how's that for a long, lengthy, complicated non-answer?
It was good,
normal answer.
Jackson. I like
It
it.
depends.
Yeah, that's right. That's Ian's popular answer. It depends. There's so many variables, right? There's body mechanics, personal body mechanics. There's the type of spring you have in the ligaments that may differ from one person to the next. So there's a lot of things that go on in the equation of, does this shoe help? And the answer, Ian, is it depends.
Trying to figure out
But
what it
even
depends
if
on.
you just
So
okay.
But
But even if you feel that it's better, then that maybe has a placebo effect. Maybe mentally that allows you to feel better near the end of a race. One other thing I think is important here is that some of these shoes are not quite as comfortable maybe as your standard trail shoes because they've got plates in them, and maybe it's a brand that you wouldn't normally use, but because it's a super shoe, you're using it. And so what I'm trying to get at is you want to make sure the shoe is comfortable first. If you're doing 100 miles and you have an uncomfortable shoe, the amount of blistering and foot pain is going to matter much more than is it 1% more efficient.
Ooh,
and so
good
it's
point.
got to be a really good fitting shoe still, and it's not worth giving that up for potential other benefits the shoe might have.
Good. Hey, go
Jackson,
ahead, Scott.
did the shoe lab ever do any research on if a particular color of shoe was faster? We don't need to answer that.
Red
What will
is
go
the
faster,
fastest
stripes?
shoe, and that's not based off of the lab. That's based off of the Pixar. Lightning McQueen was red. So that's my answer, and I will take a definitive stance. Red shoes are faster.
Nice. Hey, but before we go on to the next topic, can we go around the table and just say what brand shoe, what shoe model
boy.
are you running your next run in? You plan to run your next run. What will it be? A training run? Ian, what shoe are you going to slip into next run?
I will be in a pair of Ultra Mont Blancs probably. So I use Ultras still. I've used them for years on the trail. I use Nike super shoes pretty much for all my road running now.
Nice.
There's
Jackson?
this shoe that I got at the bargain bin a couple years ago at a running store. That was this at full cost $120 New Balance shoe, and I liked it when I got it at the bargain bin, and I still like it. And I don't even know the name of the model. I think it's the Rebel something or other, but it's cheap, it feels good, and if that's the next shoe I'll be running in.
And it's red. Matt, what about you? What's the next shoe you're going to slip into?
One of the Nike Trail Super shoes, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Hey, Scott?
I am gonna say two different shoes that I'm alternating right now.
No, you get one shoe, Scott.
One shoe. So our next run, I will be in the Arc'teryx Cylon.
Okay.
If
Well,
you haven't tried that one, I have loved that one. You would think that it has some super suction grip on the sole, but in the mud, in difficult terrain, it just hugs the trail. I love that shoe.
You can get a second shoe. Just what's your right shoe?
I'm going to go with the same, Scott. That's the shoe I would pull out. That's a good one.
Is that what you would pull out?
Yes,
Don?
it is. Now I know it's on our next run. I'm going to find something different so we don't look like a couple of twinsies out there. That's for sure. Who's next? Is it Matt or Ian? Ryan,
I think we have time
you're
for
the dice
one
controller.
short one.
Whoever has a good one.
Okay,
I got
good.
one more.
You go, Matt, because my one had more of an overlap with stuff we've already talked about.
Okay, so my question was really based on how specific do you think training runs need to be for the races that you are doing? Like how specific for a 100-miler should the training run be? Does it need to be constant? Can you break it up in chunks? Does it depend on the experience of the athlete? Which I think we can probably all say, yes, it depends. And but are you trying to make it 80% the distance? Are you trying to break it up over a weekend? Like, how do you think about specificity for these ultra distances in which you can't really replicate the distance in training?
Well, why don't you answer first, Matt?
Yeah, I've kind of come around slightly different. Like, it depends on the athlete. So someone who's a relatively beginner, I will try to chunk long blocks over the course of 2 or 3 days. And I'm always shooting for around, I don't know, 70 or 80% of the distance if I can get it in 2 to 3 days. Someone who's a bit more experienced, I'll tend to chunk it in actually shorter blocks, but have one of those days or even 2 of those days be multiple runs. So you might do a 3 by 2 hour day. So instead of a 6 hour long run, you might divide it up, and that way you can introduce a little bit of intensity in it, and you can actually extend, say, the duration that you're running during that day can be a bit longer given the recovery periods in between the 2 hour blocks. So that's what I've been thinking about and testing with some athletes.
Go on, Jackson.
Yeah, so for clarification on the question, are we talking about like duration of long run specificity, or
Could be duration, could be miles. How do you think about what a long run should look like in preparation for an ultra?
yeah, I think for 50Ks and 50 milers, however long I think the race distance is going to be, if by the end of the training cycle, if we're kind of matching that duration of that 50K or 50-mile race over, for most athletes, like their weekend. So if, they're expecting to run 12 hours for their 50 miler, if we work up to a 12-hour weekend, between adding the Saturday and Sunday duration, I'll shoot for that. And I would say for long races, 100Ks, 100 milers, whatnot, it's what physiology, time-wise, whatever else, I find that you're limited to get a whole lot much more infrequently than even that, 50-mile race duration. And, I think you're doing more harm than good if you're trying to get in a 24-hour weekend, let's say, if you're doing 12 hours on Saturday, 12 hours on Sunday. So maybe you try to push it a little bit past that. I'll say goal 50-mile duration. But I think after that, you're generally doing more harm than good in nearly every instance. So, yeah, I've never thought about it that way, but if I just kind of think big picture, how long my, back-to-back long run weekends that, I'm getting most of my ultra running athletes up to, usually I find it's about the duration that it takes them to run a 50 miler is kind of the max weekend duration, at least ballpark.
Jackson, would you normally do that by giving them racing to help them get that, or would that just be training runs?
Yeah, I was answering more in a training context. Certainly, if they're racing a 100K in preparation for a 100-mile or whatever, that'll probably be the longest long run of the block. But you're not doing training races every weekend, so it's kind of more just answering the most likely or most common scenario.
How far out are these long weekends or 3-day blocks that you're talking about, Matt? Are they 3 weeks before the race, 6 weeks before the race?
At least 3 weeks, I would say. And probably between that 3-week and 6-week block is like trying to get one in there, and then probably one before that too. So have a couple of these blocks.
Well, I'd say my answer would kind of go back to my answer to your first question as well, Matt, which is working on their weaknesses relatively. So that's how the it depends comes into it. That if it's someone who has no issues eating, they've got an iron stomach, everything's fine there. I'm not going to worry about really long runs, which are testing that, and also in terms of what build-up races they do. If it's that they haven't run in the night, maybe it's more focused on that, and maybe it's some night running or a run that starts in the light and ends in the dark. But generally, I don't go much beyond about 4 to 5 hours for long runs, other than the build-up races. And the build-up races are mainly to work on some of those things they're going to need for the main race that they do. So if it is nutrition or testing out the gear or the mentality and the problem solving of being out there for 10 hours versus 4 hours. But again, someone who's been doing it for longer and has all of that stuff pretty well dialed in, I'll probably more focus on just good, consistent mileage, and the long runs won't be uber long. I'll instead just make sure they're doing it regularly for a long period so that they get as much fitness as possible and be as consistent as possible. But I think it definitely does have to vary a lot. Even just knowing, if this person gets injured very easily if they go too far, or do they need more time to recover, that would really come into how long I'd make it. But in general, I don't like going much beyond 4 or 5 hours unless it's a build-up race. And then the build-up race is to work on more than just the physiological stuff. It's also the mentality, the gear, the nutrition, the shoes, everything else.
I have a quick question for all of you. I think Mike Wardian posted something on social media that his sister wanted to run her first 100-miler and asked him for a training schedule, and she did not want to have a coach. She just wanted a static, I don't know what it was, 20-week, 26-week schedule. And so he developed something for her, and he was reluctant to put it out there. He says, there's so many dynamics that come into an athlete training for a race that, that they've never done before, that those static schedules need to be dynamic and change depending on how the athlete is feeling, injury, stress, life. What's your comments on that? I'd want to get a short answer from all three of you. Matt, you can start. Jackson, then Ian.
Well, it depends, obviously. So,
that was Ian's answer.
Correct.
It's that is really the challenge of working with, when you actually work with a person, right? As a coach.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the thing that, it takes time to develop that sort of rapport in which you figure out what does the cadence of their life look like, and then how do you fit the training in for them? And that's where, you're working with them to understand what their life is like, and how important this is as far as like sacrifices they're willing to make and sacrifices they can't make, because often they can't make sacrifices around work and family and things like that. And you understand that, and you fit the training in where it needs to be. And I think, those things are dynamic, and it's always a pleasure to work with an ER doc who has this crazy schedule, and you're trying to fit things around, like week to week is never the same. And that's, I think, part of the fun of coaching like actual people and not just writing like these generic training plans, is that you get this problem solving of fitting things in.
It sounds like that ER doc is a perfect opportunity for some mental toughness training. That's good.
Yeah, they're pretty tough. I mean, those shifts are not fun.
Jackson, what about you?
Matt's answer, but can I ask for a clarification on the question?
Sure.
Of course. We make the rules. Yes.
Yeah, so what was the question?
Repeat the question. The question is, Michael Wardian created this 26-week training plan, and he was reluctant to give it to his sister because he says, this is just a static plan. And many times a static plan is not what human beings need, because we're changing. We have things that are changing in our lives. And that's one of the benefits of working with a coach or a dynamic plan, is that if you have a busy week, or if you're having stress in your life or whatever, you can change things up and not completely ruin the whole training schedule. So the question is, dynamic training schedule or static training schedule? And I know what your answer is now that I make the question that simple.
I mean, as a coach who people pay for dynamic training plans as part of their package, among other things. My self-preservation answer is, a dynamic training plan is much better than a static training plan. But I think we kind of answered it in the question, right? A static plan would work great for a robot, but we've all got unique things in our life, and if you're working with a professional for how best to make those changes from what you'd give that robot, that's gonna result in the best performance and ultimately the more satisfying day-to-day training.
Ian, I'm going to interrupt your answer and skew my question to you a little bit, and that is, how many coaches do you have now with Ian with Sharman Ultra Coaching?
So we have 7, including me.
Okay, so you have 7 coaches. I'm curious, when someone gets on your website and says, I'm ready for a coach, how do you go about choosing the right coach for that person?
Yeah, so it's going to be mainly just who has the right kind of skill set. We all the coaches can deal with people of any age and any type of race, but it might be, for example, someone who's training for a 200 miler. One of our coaches, Annie Hughes, she mainly focuses on 200 milers for her own running and for the people she coaches. So it's a better fit there. So it's not necessarily one coach is the one and only one, but we do try and make it that each of the coaches has a slightly different skill set so that we're kind of adding to each other as a team. So Matt in particular has a very sciencey background, which is great for every element of things, but also he's been a great marathoner. So if there's someone who's training for the marathon, that he might be one of the better people to go to. Another thing actually that's related to that is at the end of the year, so in last month in December, I do a survey of all of the people that we coach. And I asked them, one of the questions is, what is the bit of coaching that's most useful to you? And so I asked them, is it the plan? Is it the ability to email? Or is it the calls? And all of those things they definitely value, and different people say different things. And it does vary a bit by coach. But overall, the thing they value the most is the calls. It's the chance to talk to their coach and discuss things and spitball and learn and adapt. That is the thing that you don't get from a static plan, basically. But that is how it should be, that ability to ask questions and have the runner learning along the way and using the experience of the coach to go along that learning curve quicker is probably the main thing that really coaching is for.
Great. Well, coaches, we didn't get
Ian,
to
thank you
all
for
the questions.
sharing. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Don.
Scott. Well, Ian, thank you for bringing your coaches. Always bringing the very top tier information from your group of knowledgeable coaches. We all benefit. And if you're hearing these things and saying, yes, but what about, that's why you need to call Ian and ask your specific questions, because they have answers, or they'll find the right person with the answer.
Good point. And where do they go if they're interested in getting a coach?
SharmanUltra.com. So very easy to remember. Just my last name, ultra.com. So Sharman Ultra Coaching, suck. So related to what we've been talking about, embrace the suck is our tagline.
Great. Jackson, it was really nice to have you on for the first time. Matt, good to have you back. We're glad that things are going really well for you. Take all this information, put on your shoes, even if you got them at the bargain bin like Jackson did, and go out and run
Mass.